Do you follow New Age spirituality? Is New Age spirituality helpful, or is it just psychology in disguise? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, because a lot of New Age spirituality, when you really break it down, is just psychology. It's not actual true spirituality. Spirituality seems like this complex thing to a lot of people. So they get into all these practices hoping it will help, and it ends up either not helping them, or it helps them from a psychological standpoint, doesn't really connect with their spirit, or it has the opposite effect. It ends up making things much worse. So, is it spiritual practice or psychology? That is a big question here, because can you differentiate the two? Can you tell this is a spiritual practice, or no, this is a psychological practice, like psychology? Can you tell the difference? Well, that's to break down some of these things and really understand them, of how most of these spiritual practices are actually just psychology. So one of the things when it comes to like New Age spirituality is this concept, probably one that is very well known in psychology: inner child work. Now, this is something that is very, very well known in psychology, very, very helpful to deal with your own inner trauma and personal problems within your life. And the thing is, that makes it so fascinating, is that when it comes to spirituality, this is actually part of a process that is done to connect with a younger part of you that had dealt with some sort of abuse and trauma and that sort of stuff, in order to better be in the present moment now. So it's not affecting you. Trauma from the past is not affecting you the way it was in the past. Now, this is absolutely amazing. It really is, because inner child work, doing things to heal from past wounds and trauma from the past, this is a great thing, because it allows you to more rationally understand yourself, why you're going through these experiences, why you are the way that you are today, and get a better idea as to how to cope with certain situations and be able to move on from things that happened in the past. But the problem is, it's not spiritual work. The reason why it gets grouped into spiritual practice and spiritual work is because a lot of these teachings, especially like New Age type teachings, indicate that in order for you to connect with your soul and connect with who you truly are, you have to break down all of the trauma barriers. And that simply is not true. That simply is not true, because you don't need to break down all that stuff to connect with your soul. You just are the soul. You don't have to break down any sort of trauma. You don't have to cope and heal with any sort of trauma. There's other ways you can go about it, but it's not necessarily about healing and dealing with trauma. So that is one thing. That's not a spiritual practice. So let's go a little bit deeper into the mind as well, the inner masculine and inner feminine. Now, masculine, feminine energy, we are both masculine and feminine at the same time. We really are. We have feminine parts to us, we have masculine parts to us. And in psychology, this can be referred to as the anima and the animus, whether it be the male side of a female or the female side of a male. We all have masculine and feminine parts of our personality. And connecting with those is very, very healthy, again, from a psychological standpoint, especially if there is any sort of trauma involved with these inner masculine, inner feminine, these gender roles within our mind, any sort of trauma that could be involved in there. So connecting with those and expressing some suppressed inner masculine energy or inner feminine energy is a great thing, because a lot of men may put a wall up and not really connect with their feminine side, and it can cause problems, just like a woman can, block out the masculine side. So it's very important to connect with those. But is that spiritual practice? No, that is psychology. Again, that is psychology. All right, now let's start diving into something like past lives. I'm sure we've all heard of past lives, and we think, oh yeah, that is spirituality, to, connect with something, a person that you used to be in a prior lifetime. But here's the thing, how is that spiritual, or how is it psychological? Is it psychological? And the truth is, yes, it is pretty much psychological, primarily because if you're doing a meditation, your mind is creating these scenarios of what it thinks is a past life. It wants to experience a past life. It wants to experience a different reality than the current one now. So, what makes you think that your mind is showing you something that actually happened? So your mind can create a scenario just like in dreams. It can create these scenarios that show you, oh, this is what happened in the past. These are some certain circumstances that happened in the past. And when you're in that meditative state, or you're in that like dreamy type state, it feels very real, just like dreams feel real. But does that mean that it actually happened? No, it didn't. It doesn't mean that it actually happened. What it does is that it satisfies the mind, the ego. It makes it seem like this is what happened in a past life. I have lived past lives. And now, mind you, it doesn't necessarily have to be past life, because any sort of prior existence that we have could have been from any time zone or any period whatsoever. Because time is not a linear thing when it comes to spiritual practice. So certainly there can be past lives, but a lot of the practice and the meditations and all that sort of stuff is just, it doesn't really get anywhere, and it doesn't really serve any sort of purpose with your spirit. That is, again, more psychology. Okay, then what about chakras and chakra healing? If you heal the different energy centers of the body, then you'll be overall more balanced and connected with your spirit. Well, this is psychology and physiology, because it's supposed to connect your soul to your physical body. But if you look at these different energy centers in your body, they're all part of certain things that make up your physical body. And when one is imbalanced, you have physical symptoms. Physical symptoms are happening because you have one that's not in alignment. Like if your crown chakra is, overactive and your root chakra is underactive, you may have a hard time really being grounded. And you may have more psychotic or psychosis type issues. But that is physical. That is something physical. That is of the mind. That is psychology to deal with. So balancing chakras is more about balancing your overall energy within your body, which can be a very helpful thing to make you more balanced, but that's really not a spiritual practice. It's not necessarily a spiritual type thing. So then, if you talk about actual physical objects, physical objects that are, people think that have some sort of spiritual power, or some sort of power that goes beyond physical, such as you can do crystals. People sometimes use tarot cards, or any sort of other type of practice that people call spiritual. These are not spiritual practices. These are not spiritual things. Because what do crystals do? They may, of course, maybe there is some sort of energy within them. However, when we really break it down and really think about it, a lot of it could be a placebo type effect that people have. They feel more grounded when they touch a certain crystal or around it. They feel more at peace. And again, that is psychology, feeling at peace, feeling at ease. Or tarot cards. People will use them and rely on them and look at the information and meaning that it's giving, but it's not giving you a spiritual answer. It's giving you an answer as to the psychology of the mind. It's like you ask a question, how do I resolve this conflict within my life? Or you're pondering something that's going to happen in the future, and you ask a question. That's what your mind is. It's seeking for an answer. So you get an answer based on the cards, and your ego and your mind, the psychology of the mind is satisfied. That's not a spiritual practice. Okay, then let's start moving on into manifestations, the law of attraction. What you think is what you become, what you attract. That right there tells you that it's a mental practice. What you think is what you bring into your reality. That is psychology. I mean, it's not necessarily proven. I mean, it can be proven in some senses, but it's the type of practice that makes you retrain your mind into thinking and attracting what you're thinking. That's not a spiritual type thing. So that one, certainly, very, very easy to tell that that's really not of the spirit. That is more of the mind. Okay, and then what about the concepts such as like soulmates or twin flame even? This is very interesting because there can be some deeper connection that people have that it is more on a spiritual level, more on a soul level. But I think a lot of people have very big misconceptions as to what these type of connections are and the way that they are pursuing these types of connections, or the way that they're interpreting them from a very false type of idea and mindset. So when you really break it down, a lot of the concepts or teachings or information about soulmate and twin flame is probably very, very inaccurate with the reality of what is actually going on, the truth and the reality. So a lot of it, a lot of the way that people approach it is more psychology and not spirituality. Because all of these things that we just talked about here, or at least the core teachings of them, is psychology. It's not spirituality. And a lot of these concepts are in New Age spirituality. So when you really break it down, it's really not a spiritual practice. When you're doing these things, it's really not a spiritual practice. Certainly, it can help your mind, your mental state, the psychology of the mind, especially if you're dealing with some sort of problem. It can help in various ways if you're following certain ways. But the thing is, that's not always the case. It's not always going to help you the way that you think that it is. And it certainly is not going to connect you to your spirit, because you're focused on the mind. You're focused on an outcome. You're focused on trying to get somewhere. So how can you actually connect then? That's what we're talking about in our next part. So if you would like to schedule a one-on-one consultation and session with me, you can do so over at my website, autumnmasterdove.com/coaching, and I will help you different ways. I can do psychology and the mind, as well as spirit, connecting with your soul and your spirit. So there's a difference, and that's what we'll talk about in our next part.